Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Come on, y'all can do better than that. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right. Let me introduce myself, and we'll try it again. I am Reverend Ray Green, Jr. So now that I say Reverend, y'all know I need call and response, right? Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
There we go. Not quite Sunday morning, but it's good for Thursday morning. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so we are here today at this eviction summit. Thank you all for being here this early morning as we partake in a conversation around equitable housing all day today. Today in this panel, we're going to be talking about housing equity and community redevelopment and how that affects us not only in our communities, but also in the future of our communities. From redlining to housing segregation to gentrification, community development is often seen as synonymous with whitewashing, and a minority community frequently displaced as a result of it. But it doesn't have to be this way. Today we're going to delve into this topic with our panelists today. Brother Curtis Mentor, who will give his own introduction, but he is from the Well. With Brother Jason Segedy from the city of Akron, who will also give his own introduction, along with Ed Mika Mentor from the Freedom Block, along with Cheryl Stevens from Eannecy, and I will be remiss to say she is our current running lieutenant governor also, and they will all introduce themselves in their own way as we begin this panel. Are y'all ready?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. We're going to start with some level-setting questions. We're going to start with Jason and Ed Mika. If you can tell us who you are, what does your job entail, and answer the following question. The history of redlining. Why is housing equity important? And we'll start with Jason.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Ray, for that introduction. Really happy to be here talking to you about these important topics. My name's Jason Segedy. I am the Director of Planning and Urban Development for the city of Akron. I've been in that role for the last 6.5 years. I'm also a lifelong resident of Akron's West Side, so this community means a lot to me, both professionally and personally. My role at the city is to oversee planning and zoning and the capital budget as well for the city. So looking at neighborhoods, at revitalization, looking at zoning, which is land use regulation, and then looking at the capital portion of the budget for the city, which controls money spent on infrastructure and other tangible things. I think in terms of redlining and equity, Ray and I talked about this a little bit the other day. There is a lot of history. If you look back in every major American city, in 1939, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was kind of a quasi-federal agency that realtors used as a resource, put together what they called residential security maps for American cities. They subdivided cities into 4 different categories. I won't go through all of them, but the category that was considered the lowest category was colored red. So that's where the term redlining comes from. If you look at that map of Akron in 1939, it's instructive to compare it to, say, Cleveland or Youngstown, which were redlined even more severely than Akron. And I think if you look at the outcomes in those 2 cities today, Akron has many struggles, but Youngstown and Cleveland even hit harder by disinvestment and capital leaving those cities. And I think what was also instructive about those maps is that if you look at the categories of the neighborhoods from that time over 80 years ago, not that much has changed. A lot of the areas that were perceived as undesirable for people to acquire housing, or where people were prevented from getting loans for housing, most specifically people who are minorities and black, but also to some degree immigrants and so forth at that time. A lot of those patterns, if you look at income, if you look at segregation, are still in place. So I think those maps and that legacy carries all the way to the present, and it's important for all of us working together in this space to try to undo some of the harms that were done and make a more equitable community.
Thank you, Jason. And Mika, could you tell us why housing equity is important, but also tell us who you are?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mika Minter. I'm an organizer at the Freedom Block. I am also the president of the Erickson Tenant Union. Why equity in housing is important to me, because we don't get enough funding in our community. We are overlooked. Me, myself, trying to own a home, I have ran into, I don't have enough credit. But if the wages aren't rising, how can we make enough to even get a loan? How can we, build our credit and they don't pay us enough in the community? They don't want us living outside of those red lines. So as a Black woman, when I go to another neighborhood, I'm gonna say Firestone, I'm hit with a lot of obstacles because of the color of my skin, because of where I come from, how much I make. Even today, living where those red lines are in the Black community, I make enough money to, rent a home, but I still am hit with those obstacles. Like, basically, you don't have enough credit. You know what I'm saying? What is enough credit to own a home? What is enough credit? Why does it even go by credit? So that's why it's very important to me, because as a Black woman, discrimination is here, and with this redlining, that's exactly what it is doing. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mika. Thank you, Jason, for answering those introductory questions. Right now, I want to go to Cheryl, allow Cheryl to introduce herself, but also answer the question, what does housing equity actually mean? Do you believe housing is a right, and what does that look like?
Good morning. I'm Cheryl Stevens, and I'm the president and CEO of East Akron Neighborhood Development Corporation. For those who live in a majority of the communities in Akron, that means EANDC. Everybody says EANDC. No one says our whole name anymore. The reality is that we believe that affordable housing should be an opportunity and an option for everyone who lives in our marketplace. Our marketplace is Summit County and Stark County, and we own manage, or have invested in over 1,000 units between Akron, Canton, and Massillon. So on any given day, my staff and I are all over this dual county area, looking at making sure that we provide quality housing units to families, seniors, and veterans. Why is this incredibly important work? Because it's not only just the provision of a place to live, but it is the creation of jobs, and there's a whole industry around housing that creates employment opportunities of a substantive nature. We all understand about the construction unions and their validity and the decent wages that you make whether you're a union member or not, an electrician, the joke about a plumber making as much as a doctor. They're all true, and we all need them. And you don't need a college education to be a plumber, but you do need skill development. And those are the kinds of things we believe at EANDC. But most importantly, we believe that building equity and understanding how to present that in a way that it gets monetized or turned into real cash for a variety of people, both individually and collectively, is incredibly important for people like us, people of color, women who are single moms with limited income, folks who don't have a PhD in physics. The average working class person should have not only the opportunity to live in quality housing, but to own quality housing. And in order to support that, in order to create opportunities to build value and to build capacity, we have a home ownership center at EANDC, and that home ownership center talks to women like at Minta, families, and seniors sometimes, to coach them We call our classes financial fitness to coach them in how to meet the market's requirements to begin to rent better or to own a home of their own. We also have classes that teach people what to look for in a mortgage, how to create their own down payment. We also have relationships with the Federal Home Loan Bank and at least 7 lenders in this marketplace that help us help people take care of themselves. We don't take care of them. We coach them, help them learn how to take care of themselves. So I'm going to make sure before Edminta leaves here today that she talks with my homeownership folks and or the folks that do our capacity development, or even my CFO to make sure, because she's in another room presenting. But the reality is that we can turn these options into reality individually. Every year we sell units that we originally created as rental units to tenants for them to own their own home. So we're not just a landlord, we have a mission. We're a mission-driven organization as a 501(c). And we work with all forms of government. We work with private developers. We partner with them sometimes. But our mission separates them from us. And on occasion, Jason and I tell a story about how I was so committed to the development of a multifamily project in this community that I called him and did a version of, did I say I kidnapped you?
Yeah. It was all above board.
Till he helped us find a site for a development that we could keep the costs down for the acquisition of the land. We needed their support to get financing, and they kicked in a significant amount of money, $1 million increments, so that we could develop something that would remain affordable for the rest of at least my life and Jason's predictable lives. If we could exceed the 100-year mark, couldn't we? So the reality is that this is a complex process, but it has real deliverables. Can we help someone figure out how to rent a better house? Can we maintain it in such a way that anyone, no matter what their income stream, is willing to live in that unit? I have units that I would live in myself, but I'd be forced to pay much higher rent than any of our tenants. The reality is we make the difference. For those of you who are activists, we need you to make sure that we have a louder voice to make these kinds of things happen. We can't do it without you. It is a series of partnerships. On a regular basis, I am calling up the team at the city. Most of Jason's staff now know who I am. I don't leave anyone alone, right, Helen? And then literally when they changed deputy mayors, I kept calling till I got the new deputy mayor. This process of living in quality housing, no matter what your income level is, and having the opportunity to own a home of your own is incredibly American. People like me who were emancipated from slavery in 1860 plus, the dream was that you would get 40 acres and a mule. So ownership is something that Americans have believed in forever. When the Pilgrims came from England and settled in this country in the Northeast, the whole idea was that in England they could not own homes, that they were not landed gentry, and so they were excluded from owning something and building wealth and value. In order to do this, we have got to be activists. We've got to make sure that the elected officials who serve us believe in these kinds of things and don't serve us in such a way that there's just a few people who get to live decently instead of everyone. Did I answer everything?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cheryl. At this time, we're going to move to Brother Curtis Minter Jr. To introduce yourself, but also answer the same question. What does housing equity actually mean? Do you believe housing is a right, and what does that actually look like?
Thank you, Ray. Curtis Minter Jr., Operations Director, the Well Community Development Corporation. We are a place-based nonprofit serving the Middlebury neighborhood, restoring housing, creating economy, and supporting place. I lead the Asset Management Division with more than 70 residential units, 50-plus tenants, and 4 commercial properties. And I think we need to reorient ourselves when it comes to housing equity. And the starting point is people. I think we owe one another the bare minimum gift of empathy. And I think when we dismiss that part, we make room for corruption. And so with that being said, whether you be a lending institution, a developer, the public sector, a landlord, you have to deeply consider that there is a person, not an occupant, but a person before you. And I think what translates most for the city of Akron is the single greatest eviction in the building of the Innerbelt, where we've seen more than 10,000 people who look like me were displaced due to a highway that never fulfilled its purpose. And so what they did not see, I believe, was people, and that what matters most, and that's what leads our work here at this table. And so certainly we deserve the right to be homeowners, but if and when we are misused or taken advantage of, that's certainly lost in translation.
Thank you, Brother Curtis Minter. Let's give our panelists a hand. Those were our introduction round of the questions. We're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this panel now, the what I like to call the hot seat. We're going popcorn style right now. How many people here believe housing is a right? How many people here believe that if you were promised life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that life begins with food and shelter first? So no one should be redlined out of housing. And as Brother Minter just mentioned, Summit County, particularly Akron, but particularly worldwide, black communities have historically been displaced, replaced by highways, and increased homelessness. We have the highest houseless population in the country. There's more black people sleeping on couches than any other race in America. We are the leaders in the houseless population. Summit County is the leaders in the eviction population. And what we want to discuss today, and what I want to ask the panelists, and I think I'm gonna start with Ed Mika with this question: what role does policies and practices play in fair and affordable housing? What roles does policies and practices play in fair, affordable housing?
In order to answer that question, I think we must ask ourselves, like, the question of why do we go by the gross income instead of the net income when it comes to renting? We don't see those taxes that comes out. Why don't we go by those monthly, everyday expenses that people have every day to calculate how much rent they are paying, they should pay? That's because people like me aren't sitting at the table when they make those decisions. We have people from out of state coming into our community, taking over our community, investing in our community, and have no idea of what's going on in that community. So when you got a landlord who comes in and invests in where you live and take you out of your home, put you in another home that's worse than what you had, that makes people irritated, it makes people angry, and there's no accountability for when those people come in and put these people in the community in infestation, just this placing them where they don't want to be. And it's like tenants don't have a say-so or anything. You can either they're scared of losing their housing. And so they just accept what they are offered because they feel they don't have anything else. So I'm gonna just say, yeah, Pete, the way I'm sorry, but I feel like people from that community, people in poverty, should make decisions for people in poverty, because a rich person, they don't know what it's like to be in a situation that I'm in, or somebody who come from where I come from, a low income area, an area where it was redlined and multiple people had to come into and discriminated against, can't get a home. They don't know what it's like to be in that situation, so they can't come in and make those decisions for us. Thank you.
Jason, what role does policies practice play into fair, affordable housing?
It's a great question. You know, I lived in Akron my whole life. I work for Akron. My focus is justifiably on Akron. It always will be. But I think when we think about policy questions, it's important to zoom out and realize Akron isn't an island. And Akron is part of Summit County, and Akron is part of Northeast Ohio. And if you look at disparities economically, they're extreme. So in the city of Akron, 80% of the people who work in Akron and make over $40,000 a year do not live in Akron. If you look at the median household income in Akron, it's around $40,000 a year. In the rest of Summit County, it's double that. If you look at, we could go down the list, racial segregation, economic segregation. So like I said, my focus is on Akron, but I think if we're going to address issues related to justice and housing, we cannot stop at the 62 square miles of the city of Akron. The reality is that there are a lot of people who moved out of the city back in the day. There are a lot of people that surround this city that are much wealthier than the people that live in the city. And I think if we're going to tackle, because these are systemic problems, and so I don't have the answers on all those problems. I have thoughts on some of them, but I think it's important that as a county and as a metropolitan area and as all of Northeast Ohio, we work together, because the city of Akron cannot address all these problems on its own. I think one example, and maybe I'll talk at greater length about this later, you look at zoning. So I oversee zoning for the city of Akron. Akron could do better. We're constantly looking to reform our zoning code to make more opportunities for affordable housing. But if you look at the amount of land in the city of Akron that's devoted for multifamily housing zoning, basically for apartments, it is far higher than any of our neighbors, maybe Cuyahoga Falls and Barberton notwithstanding. But so I think that's a great example of a policy, because if you have zoning in suburban communities that basically excludes apartments, you're essentially excluding people by income. And if you're excluding people by income, they're not going to live in your community. And I think what makes that even more difficult for a lot of low-income people today, and I've seen this in my life, over my lifetime on the west side of Akron. You know, when I was a kid, we would go shopping on Copley Road. There was Gold Circle at Wallhaven, and everything moved to Fairlawn, and then it moved to Montrose. And so you're in a situation now where you have people that they want jobs or they even want shopping, and they have to leave Akron to do it. And what's even worse is they can't live near those jobs, or they can't live near that shopping. And of course, we want people, you know, the mayor's been very adamant about, we want to retain and attract residents. So I would love to have the residents here in Akron, but in order to do that, I think we do have to address with our neighbors issues like zoning. So I think I'll stop there, but that's just one example, I think, of a policy that we have to address holistically.
Thank you, Jason. Brother Curtis, what role does policies practice play into fair, affordable housing?
Yeah, I can speak to the issues that we are facing in the Middlebury neighborhood, which is lopsided when it comes to the housing market. And so typically when you have a healthy neighborhood, there is 60 to 70% home ownership. In ours, there is the exact opposite. There's 60 to 70% renting, renter-occupied units. And so that sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, community creates a slumlord culture. And there certainly exists absentee landlords where there is a disconnect, right? Because they don't exist here. and in some way, shape, or form cannot readily take care of the tenants that occupy their units. And so with that being said, I know there is a ton of studies across the country begging the question, how do we give our local government, our housing code teeth, so that we can challenge some of those individuals who are taking advantage of people, right? And I think that's something that we need to explore and something that we need to continue to advocate for. So,
Thank you, Curtis. Jason, you talked about the mayor's plan to increase the population, I believe, to 250,000. How do we increase the population and invest in low-income communities without pushing people out? We know historically, particularly in Summit County, particularly in low-income communities, displacement is normally what happens. How do we invest? How do we build up without pushing out the existing residents?
It's another great question. We absolutely do not want people to be pushed out by new development. And I'll talk a little bit first about the mayor's plans and then talk a little bit, I think, what is an opportunity in Akron and what I think makes it a little different than some of the other cities in the country where issues like gentrification have come up. So the mayor's plan is really predicated on, first and foremost, retaining people in Akron, giving people who already live here more services, more opportunities, but also attracting residents. And one reason that the attraction part is important, the city, from when I was a child, the city has lost almost 100,000 residents. So we had 290,000 residents in 1960. Today we have 190,000 people. And with the loss of those people, like I was talking about earlier, comes the loss of jobs, comes the loss of shopping, and so all those opportunities that could help lower income people in Akron, a lot of them have moved to the suburbs. So that's one reason we believe that it's not an either or, it should be a both and, retaining and attracting residents. I think the opportunity in Akron to do this more equitably, if you compare us to San Francisco or to Washington, D.C., or to Brooklyn. Brooklyn, my brothers lived in Brooklyn for 20 years. Brooklyn has the same land area as the city of Akron with 12 times as many people. So you picture Akron with not 3, not 6, but 12 times more housing in this area in a city of over 8 million people, with people from all over the world who want to live there, and you have a certain demand equation that we do not have in Akron. That's why people in Brooklyn are paying $4,000 a month in rent routinely. So that is not to minimize. There are real problems with especially rent being affordable in Akron. Our owner-occupied homes, if you are in a position to own a home, and many are not, and that's a big problem, like Cheryl said. But it's a pretty affordable housing market for owner-occupied homes. But that doesn't help you if you rent. And if you live in Akron, you still have problems making rent. Doesn't matter that it's not $4,000. So I'm not trying to minimize that. But my point is that there's a certain demand in some of these cities that have seen displacement that I don't think it is something that has to be, it's not the same type of market, I guess is my point. And so I think we have an opportunity here as we bring people back, that the demand in the city is still so soft, and there's a lot of vacant land, that we have some opportunities to both bring people back to rehab homes and without people being displaced. And I think that's something we're going to continue to work on. I think for everyone in here, if you are aware of people being displaced by some sort of new development, the city absolutely wants to know about that. I think there are things we can look at creatively, like with property tax, maybe freezing property taxes in an area that's redeveloping so existing residents get a benefit. But it is something very much on the mayor's mind that we want to be equitable. But I think the city continuing to lose people, as we've seen for 60 years, is not a recipe for success.
Thank you, Jason. Cheryl. How do we reinvest into communities without pushing out long-term residents?
So one of the things is that we combine the policies into action. So the voices of the folks who most need affordable housing should be heard, and their comments should be included into the policies of how we establish the housing. So first of all, we need to take a look at the fact that we need housing that has transportation links, that ownership of those housing units by landlords like myself or by other parties should be, especially if it's rehab, should be inspected so that we have quality units out there. I know that that is an anathema to my our friends who are on the private side of development and own large blocks of rental units. But we need to make sure we're providing quality units, and the only party that can get in and inspect is the city and the county. So they need to do at least biannual inspections to make sure that the units are being maintained appropriately, and that for example, just that the HVAC units in these housing units are maintained in a quality manner. I think that it is entirely appropriate for us to look at our land use policies county-wide so that we increase levels of density required or encouraged in suburban communities, because part of not having the kind of wealth that allows us to invest in core cities is that people with their money have moved out, and then they require us to invest more in these interstate and freeway exchanges that remove people from the core city. So it's now easier to get to some place where they restrict you from building anything that's dense. Our retail has national policies on where retail gets to go, leaving our core city with food deserts. That's just bad policy to allow grocers to move away from us when we have food needs. And so all we get to do is shop at dollar stores if we live in the core city. That's wrong. We also need to make sure that we do something like freeze property taxes. When California, incredibly progressive, what they do in California, and we need to take a look at in Ohio, is when you buy your home, it freezes at that sales price. And your children can take title from the house from you, and it stays at that same original sales value. That means that if gentrification was to happen around you, you could still afford your home. Because one of the ways, especially in the South, we have seen that minority families have lost their homes is when the values of taxes increase, including on their home, which they haven't sold for 60 years because it transferred from mother to daughter to the granddaughter. There was no real sale. But the value of that house goes up, and now what was in the late 30s, they paid $50,000 for. Now the house is valued at $500,000, but the family's incomes have not kept up with being able to pay real estate taxes on a $500,000 home. That doesn't happen when you freeze the taxes for the family at that level. We need to be creative in how we do things. We shouldn't just say, this is the way we've always done it, and stay with it. We must be willing to look at best practices and then accommodate changes.
Thank you, Cheryl. Curtis, how do we reinvest in communities without pushing long-term residents out?
Yep, so I'm born and raised in the great city of Akron, Ohio, and was fortunate enough for a season of my life to go to Denver, Colorado, where I experienced what I call hyper-gentrification. And I think to offer some clarity, what Jason has already said, there are key ingredients to displacement, right? Mm-hmm. And that typically involves two parts: an influx of people and not enough housing. That is not the case right now in the city of Akron, right? There is a decreasing population and a high availability of housing. And so in that, I think there presents opportunity. And to speak to where I believe many of our residents are today, I'll share the story about my grandmother, who I love dearly, Early B. Jones, who made me the man I am today. She stayed at 899 Mercer Avenue for nearly all of my life, and I'm 35. And in my late 20s, I learned that she did not hold the deed to her home. It was subsidized through AMHA. She would paint the porch every summer. She would plant flower beds and ensure her grass was cut, which was the responsibility of either myself or my uncle, and took a great deal of pride, right, in her home that wasn't hers. And so I think that challenges us to really explore what is home ownership in the city of Akron, right? And I think we're at a crux in the road because we are afforded the opportunity to reimagine affordable housing. And so there is nuance in that. At the Well Community Development Corporation, we've been fortunate enough to receive a ton of private dollars that allow for us to go where investors don't, where we are putting in anywhere from $50,000 to $125,000 in a home to bring it to a quality where all of our staff would be comfortable living in it, right? But there is challenges in that. Nobody is giving $50,000 to $125,000 to a small community development corporation, especially when it appraises for less than the investment. That just doesn't make sense to lending institutions. Got it. But with that being said, we recognize that there is a problem. And so how do we become more savvy, I guess, in the way that we create affordable housing? And certainly there's room for live tech and other things, but in disinvested neighborhoods, I think we need to critically think through how we invest. And so that part.
Thank you, Curtis. Ed Mika, how do we invest in neighborhoods like yours without pushing you out?
I feel you should just involve the community. Involve those people who you are affecting. That's basically how I feel. Just like the housing market rate has went sky high. What about the wages? They're still the same. People who work at McDonald's, people who work at Burger King. I've been a cook since I was 16 years old. So for the wages to be the way they are in our community is ridiculous. We work just as hard as those people in those suits with all that money. So, yeah, even harder. So I feel, raise the wages. That's one situation that we could really do to help these tenants. Also, when you got people coming into our community and, like I said before, don't know anything about that community. You go and you put them in different homes in the same complex, not knowing the situation or how they're going to affect them, and you're not trained. These management companies aren't trained to deal with people where I come from, people of the color of my skin, in poverty, and they're just here for a buck to make an investment without the concerns of that community. So that's a couple things that I think we could do to help our community. And far as the credit scores and all that, if it is kind of impossible for us to even get credit, why does that even matter? I could be making $40,000 and try to go own me a home, but I still can't because I don't have credit. Tenants don't know their rights. Tenants don't have the information where I'm at to even understand there is resources out there that can help you. I feel like when you're in low income, there should be some type of law to protect tenants. Because where I'm at, these management companies, these owners are not being held accountable for anything that they do. I know my experience, I've been in my apartment, renovated, infested, That's why I became a tenant unit president, because I'm living in infestation. I am fighting for my community to get better housing. But when you got people who discriminate against the color of my skin, you go unheard, things go unheard. I think we really need to change those things as far as management owners coming into our community, changing things, and they don't know anything about it.
Thank you, Admika. Let's get our panelists another hand. Does everyone in here believe that housing is a right? Yes. That regardless of race, skin color, religion, that people deserve affordable, livable housing. Do we believe that?
Yes.
Do we believe that? Yes. Yeah, I need some of those. Do we believe that?
Yes.
Because right now we are living in a country where if you are not wealthy, you do not have housing. If you are not wealthy, nobody cares that you don't have housing. We have built the country from the mantra of survival of the fittest. And that has got us to where we're at right now with the highest eviction rate in the country here in Summit County, where people that look like me and you are homeless, all because someone decided to raise the rent that didn't need to be raised. Not because the market, not because of anything else. They raised the rent because they felt like raising the rent. And right now we are in a crisis. In Akron, Ohio, we have people living in sewage. We have people living in rat and roach-infested apartments. We have people that need help that can't get help simply because they're not caught up on their taxes. We have people that are struggling simply because we ride down the street and blame those people over there. That is their fault. They didn't work hard enough. They didn't get the right education. They didn't seek out the opportunities, not understanding that there is not enough opportunities for everybody to make what needs to be made to live. So what we want to do now is we want to open it up for you to ask questions. We want to begin to discuss how you can get involved and how you can change these things. But our panelists are open right now. We're going to start a Q&A session right now. If you have a question, I think we have some people here with some microphones. Raise your hand and someone will get to you. We got this young lady in the back first, right here with her hands up, right here to my right, yes. And then we have the lady in the purple, and then we have this young lady up front.
Hi, thank you for the presentation and the contributions from all the panelists. I had a question actually first for Director Segedi with the city. How many mixed income developments have you planned and developed in the city of Akron? And do you find that to be part of the solution to equitable city investment and community housing?
Sure. So typically, the city's role is often what I would call a catalyst. So a lot of times our role is to set the stage. There's really not property per se that the city is the developer, but we most certainly work with developers. Goes back to Cheryl and our working relationship, and we have similar relationships with the Well and private developers as well. But I think two of the best examples of mixed income housing where the city was involved, and the housing, maybe even more importantly, was upgraded, and it goes to what Ray said earlier, from very substandard, poor quality housing, was when Elizabeth Park was replaced with Cascade Village, and when the previous incarnation of Edgewood was replaced with the Edgewood that exists today. And if you remember those older buildings, I don't think there's probably anyone in this room that would argue with that the previous housing was better. And one of the models at Cascade Village was to try to get a mix of different incomes there. More recently, we really try to work hard at the city to encourage a variety of housing to be constructed or renovated. So with the American Rescue Plan funds we're receiving, we're going to have a pretty significant housing rehab component to help people who are in existing housing. We're also working on with developers on a variety of different price points in terms of housing. So at Good Park, which is the former Perkins Middle School, that's mostly single family and townhome development. We worked with Cheryl on Middlebury Commons. We worked with Cheryl on I Promise. We're working with Curtis and with Zach at the Well on both rehab of housing and infill development. And a lot of that we put home dollars, which are federal dollars, as well as some of our community development block grants. So we try to work hard on it. It can always be better. We're always looking to improve. But we really, the mayor believes strongly to get housing for people of all kinds in Akron.
Thank you for all that work that you do. And to follow up with that, I wanted to ask one last thing. How much federal grant money have you applied for the city of Akron for programs such as Choice, Community Neighborhood Redevelopment? So
currently there's a Choice Neighborhoods Planning Grant that the Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority received for Summit Lake, and that's to look specifically at the older Summit Lake homes that are on the east shore of Summit Lake. Our hope working with AMHA is that can ultimately turn into a Choice Neighborhoods grant for the replacement and upgrade of that housing. And that program is somewhat similar to the Hope 6 program, which is the program that created Cascade Village in Edgewood. So that's still a couple years away. They would still have to get that grant, but Summit Lake's an area that we're really trying to focus a lot of resources on right now.
Hi, and thank you for taking my question. First, I want to make a comment. I want to make a comment to you to say that I appreciate all that you are doing regarding what community is. Community is not buildings. Communities are people, and that the people should be heard, should be involved at whatever capacity it is. So let's embrace that community, not just the housing. So my question is for Jason regarding the rent here in Akron. As you mentioned, the median income is $40,000. What person do you know who makes $40,000 can afford $1,200 a month for rent? There should be some type of cap when it comes to rent. Is this something that the city is talking about? And is it, and is it going to happen? It needs to happen. If you understand what people are bringing in their households, why are you doubling their rent? Because just a few years ago, that same square footage was only, 800. Now it's 1,400. So this is something that definitely needs to be addressed because that's one of the entities that is causing homelessness.
Yeah, great point. And like I was saying earlier, it's a quite affordable city if you look at the median cost of an owner-occupied house. But like you said, people who are making below $40,000, especially as you get quite a bit below, they're not able, for many reasons, credit and so forth, as was mentioned here, and they do rent. Almost half of the city rents. So about 49% of Akron's households are renter-occupied. It's a significant proportion of the population. I'm not aware of any legislation or policy that's been worked on capping rent, but I appreciate you bringing it up because I think it's one of those policy issues that's difficult to try to tackle, but it is very important. We definitely recognize there are a lot of people in Akron who have trouble making rent, and what a huge percentage of their income goes to housing.
We have a question right here, and then right here, and then we'll come back to you right here.
I'm gonna grab her in the back real quick.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Edmona Babers. I am 67, and I just got a Section 8 voucher, and I was excited to find a place to stay. On North Howard, I found an apartment. We have 3 immigrants, because it's just a 4-suite. The landlord was always talking, smiling. Well, I signed the lease January 6th. I moved in at the end of January because I wanted to clean up the apartment. Well, I have rats. There are rats in the whole building, so I have to come here. I might cry. Anyway, I've only stayed in the apartment for 5 nights. I pay rent, light, gas, and cable. He keeps putting down rat traps. I take pictures. I got so many pictures. It's been 3 more new homes. I have no problems with the immigrants. I love people. I'm a Christian, and I follow Jesus Christ. And I do what I need to do. I'm also a home health aide, and I have 2 patients. And I worked for one of them for a whole year without any pay until I helped both of them get a home health aide. Now, this landlord is a slumlord. He should have told me, gave me the option. Well, Edmona, I have a rat problem. Do you still want to move in? I would have said no. I was sleeping in the bed one night, and a rat was coming up to the door of my bedroom. I don't stay there. I just go and get my mail. They're going to give me another voucher, but that's not the problem. In Cuyahoga Falls Avenue, around that area, is so many immigrants, and I'm looking around, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, we used to have a lot of houses for Section 8. Now, you have raggedy houses. The immigrants, I don't have nothing against them, but y'all help them, not y'all, the government, the federal government, whatever, help them more than they help us. It's pushing us down on the list for Section 8, I'm quite sure. All those houses, I know they just didn't come over here and buy them. And immigrants in his building, oh, he could be, I've been a landlord for 30 years. Well, why don't you call a past person? Right. So I called the health department. You know what they said? Oh, they didn't give us any funding to get rid of rats. So you have to talk to your landlord. Last week, the hole is in the closet in my bedroom. There wasn't a hole there before. It's a piece of wood panel in the closet. Okay, they chewed through that. They got on the bed. They pooped on the bed. I take pictures of poop every single day. I go get my mail. So I don't understand if you can teach people to be clean, but if the city can't send inspectors out or people to get rid of rats, they're going to multiply. It only takes 19 to 21 days for them to have babies. So could you imagine how that building is full of rats? Now, the other people might not mind. I might.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, ma'am. And I want to answer that question personally
But wait
myself.
a minute. I got to get rid of all of my furniture.
I totally understand what you're saying, ma'am. I work in the city as a tenant organizer and organizing tenants and renters, and I totally understand what you're saying. And what we have is an infrastructure problem in Akron, in the city, and in Summit County, where we're tearing up the sewers. We don't have enough inspectors in the city to actually do the job properly. That allows us to exterminate properly and set things down and set things in place that allows for rodents and roaches and things to not infest our community. We have a lack of communication problem between the city and the county and the health department, to where boxes are getting checked, but communications is not happening in between departments, that allows for these things to get alleviated. And what we really need to do, what we really need, is we need that testimony written out on paper. I know oftentimes we want to blame our neighbors, and oftentimes we want to, point the fingers, but what we have to do as a community is come together as a community, understand what the problem is, and understand what our tax money goes to. And our tax money should be able to alleviate most, if not all, of these problems that we have. As Amika has mentioned several times, the lack of a living wage, the lack of sanitary housing causes for people to ultimately not care anymore. And then these things begin to matriculate into a problem that comes out of hand. And what I ask you for is grace. It's not the immigrants' problem. This is not the immigrants' problem. This is a city's problem.
I did not say it was the immigrants.
No, I know you didn't say
It's
that.
the
I know you didn't say that.
landlord's fault.
That's what I'm saying.
Not them.
That's what I'm saying,
I have
ma'am.
nothing against them, but
Ma'am,
what
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
No, what
We're
I'm
gonna.
saying
We
is
have
the
to.
city and
We have
state
to
got money,
understand
right?
that together we can solve this problem. We have to be able to take the testimony that you have, write that testimony down, gather more of those testimonies, and we must go down to our city council and Summit County representatives to ask them, how do we alleviate this problem? And we must go with solutions in hand, because there are solutions that can happen. But this room right here that just heard that testimony should go home today and write a letter to your representative to ask them, are they representing places that are dealing with these issues and they're not doing anything? And then together with the city, with the county, with HUD, and the federal government, we can begin to redirect funds to hire more inspectors, to hire more qualified inspectors that allows us to alleviate those problems without getting into conflict with each other over a situation that's not our problem that we moved into. So I thank you so much for your comment, because those are the things that we're dealing with in the city of Akron right now. That is not an exaggeration story. Those are the stories that we run into right here. Those are the stories that we run into every day. Those are the stories that Amika is working with every single day in the city of Akron. Those stories in places like Erickson, in places like the Mayflower, in places on the north side, in places on the south side. This is not concentrated to one area. This is a citywide problem, and that's why we're having this eviction summit today.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is a lot of new information for me, some new information, some things I'm familiar with. Well, my question is, after hearing that lady talk, I have a different question. So I'm a little, at first I didn't know how I felt about the statement of as far as inspection, is how it would impact the tenant, forced inspection on private ownership. So if I'm a landlord where I have to have this entity come in to inspect my property to tell me what I need to fix, I believe in accountability. Because the first thing I thought is, that cost then is going to trickle down to this same tenant that you're saying cannot afford it. So I may be a landlord that's not a slumlord, but I know how to make it a comfortable setting. It's not infested with things, but then certain code, you may come in and say, oh, this is not up to current code, but it's been affected, so I have to change it. I have to pass that cost to the tenant. So that may cause high rental, prices. But then my other question came when I heard her, how could a government, like if you get a Section 8 certificate or you're in subsidized housing, that you can be in a situation like that. So before, I think focusing on, this is just Carla speaking, private industry and landlords, we have to properly manage subsidized and government funding housing before you come into the private sector, as far as managing how I'm keeping my homes as a landlord of private industry, right? And so also, Ms. Cheryl and Ed Mika?
Yeah.
Okay, so Ed Mika made some comments about just having a lack of knowledge, not knowing tenants' rights, because tenants do have rights, but not being aware of your rights. So you find yourself in a situation where you're just accepting what you believe you have to accept because you don't want to be homeless. And then Cheryl speaks about all of the program that ENDC has, right? Which I can bear witness, and ENDC has great programming, and it's very easy to follow steps, right? I benefited from counseling service. I am a homeowner though, and I've been since I was 19 years old, but I benefit because things can change, right? Incomes and all those things. And I was grateful that the East Akron Neighborhood Development Center was there and had real good information that I could benefit from because I work. And sometimes some of us can be the working poor. So
Most of the time.
Comments, and I just want to tell you, comments like, the people who making the money and who has, these things don't understand. Well, sometimes some of us come from those situations and we do understand. So I think what you're saying is collectively, we do have to come together to change that narrative, which now I'm about to land this plane. So then Mr. Mentor, who is over at the Well, I've had the pleasure to visit over there, and it seems like great things are happening. But I couldn't help but to recognize when he said that he's doing a righteous thing, that they're putting like $50,000 into a home, $100,000 into a home, to make affordable, nice housing. So then my question says, if the people who you're making the home for cannot qualify for a $50,000 to $100,000 loan, or even what does those payments look like if they're not bringing 20% down, which if we're talking about poverty, or 10% down, we have to rethink that too. Because if we're going to create affordable housing, which I think is the key, good housing, affordable housing, to answer someone's earlier question about if a landlord raises the rent, I think we have to be very careful because we do want righteousness to prevail and people to have housing. But when we talk about, as American citizens, when we talk about private industry and capping rent in a capitalist society, we have to look at that. Because if you're poor now, you may not always be poor. Then how does that narrative change for you? But when we talk about subsidized properties and someone who's doing it right and bringing quality housing, now the conversation needs, how can we also self-fund these and create mortgages, to get people like the lady who said about her landlord raising the rent, who I'm sure is private. And if it's not subsidized housing, okay, then it's unfortunate to have to move. But still, you have to do what's best for you. And if it's affordable housing that you can move into with caps, if your rent won't be increased, then I think those are kind of how the conversations need to go, as I'm just processing this. But I'm very cognizant, this is very concerning, because as Curtis said earlier, compassion and empathy. How could we have any of our citizens, young people, she said she was 67 years old, rat infestation on things that we as taxpayers help to fund. If she has a Section 8 certificate or they're in subsidized housing, it's no way anyone in any of these circumstances, the least of us, should be in situations like that. So I just wanted to make that statement.
Go ahead. We got a question over here, and then one back here, but we want to let the panelists take this question real
So
quick.
I want to take a stab at this, because an effort. There's no easy solution, because one group of folks says, I don't want you in my units, and another group of folks say, sometimes our tenants don't, the tenants of units don't want inspections of the units. So I am a believer in inspections, because I think that sometimes the quality of units change over time. And so I like to inspect even when there's no voucher, no subsidy of the financing. I think that rental units should be inspected every 2 years by either county or city. That is an anathema to some people. They think I'm too intrusive. But if we are to maintain a certain quality of basic housing across the marketplace, because we can't, there are no tests for you to become a landlord. There are no licensures that are required. We do not tell landlords they must invest a minimum amount of money in a unit, but what we can do as government and investors in the community is ask that people who are providing housing units make sure that there is some quality maintenance of those units. And some people say, well, if somebody will rent it, then it should be okay. But sometimes you don't have the skill sets to look at every nook and cranny to make sure that everything is okay. And I've seen units that look good in the daytime, and at night the roaches came out. So I know that there are, I have interacted with members of realtors associations who are unhappy with me because I talk about having some level of inspections at a minimum when the properties sell. And my favorite is every 2 years, rental units need to be inspected. But that doesn't solve the problem if people won't reinvest in the units. And that is why I run a mission-driven organization. We always make sure that the quality of the units, the 700 plus that we actually own ourselves, and the units that we are in partnership with other people where we found additional financing to reduce those costs to make sure that they stay, at least a portion of the units stay affordable in the markets in which we work. We want to make sure those units don't come up with problems that make you want to cry for someone else. And so occasionally we have to let government do inspections. And I would say that one of the things we need to do as a community is to make sure that we have more partners like the Well and EA&DC, who, while we need to make sure that we generate enough money to pay our staff and invest in our next project, we don't have to have a 20% return on our investment. And so the money that gets given or awarded to and I see my friend Rochelle, Habitat for Humanity, does a phenomenal job of making sure that helping you get ready to look at home ownership, and then helping you figure out how to sometimes take what was a rental unit, rehab it and buy it, or new construction and buy it. One of the things is that not enough people know that these opportunities are out there. So please tell your friends and neighbors, and those of you who are activists, to come and visit folks like the Well, folks like Habitat, folks like EA&DC, folks like the I Promise. I see Jeff Wilhite up here in the front row. You talk to us. Google housing and affordable housing for Akron or Summit County. We cannot talk to everyone, but we need you to begin to talk about those of us with a better mission so that we can make the folks who are landlords without a mission perform better in order to get their units occupied.
Thank you, Cheryl. We'll let Curtis answer, and then we'll take one more question.
Yeah, I appreciate that statement, Carla. Definitely. And to add, so we talk about reimagining affordable housing, and there is strategy riddled in this private investment, right, in a disinvested neighborhood. And so I communicated earlier that we will spend anywhere from $50,000 to $125,000 in a home for it to be appraised far less than. But the unique advantage in serving a neighborhood and being a community development corporation is that when we recognize we serve a transient neighborhood, so we want to meet people where they are, and we're afforded the opportunity to hold those properties with less restrictions because for the most part we're using private funding, right? And so in that we have been able to charge rents that are exponentially less than market rate, right? But we take on the responsibility of being a better landlord with aspirations of controlling a portion of the market to combat the slumlord and absentee culture that exists in our neighborhood. And our prayers that hopefully that becomes a case study for others across the country. And we are not by ourselves in this. There are some amazing groups in the United States that are exploring what it means to create housing trusts, How do we not only create dividends for accredited investors, but also the people that live in these neighborhoods? And so there's some exciting things happening around the country, and we hope to be a part of that new wave. So.
Thank you, Curtis.
Just
We'll
really,
take one more question.
Just really quickly, I just want to say thank you to this panel. This has been really rich. So thank you very much. And Jason said, just a comment. It's always a concern when we have a lot of development in an area, and we know the history of the big G word. So I'm glad we're considering. I think of Summit Lake, who you and I both love, about the whole idea of a legacy abatement for those folks who have borne the brunt of the day when there were little, no investments there. So they're not property taxed out, as my parents live there. I represent that community. So that's important, so thank you. So here is the question for the panel. We've had this challenge with LLCs, right, and property ownership. It's like almost finding where is Waldo. And so how do we address that issue at the local level? It may require us to do some exploration at the state levels too, but we have to address that. I had somebody buy property around me that had an owner one day. Next thing, they're LLC, and they're LLC 1, 2, 3, 4. And so it's like trying to find out when there's trouble, like who are the people, and they have 7, 8, 9, 10 LLC, and the same people. So how do we really address that?
Go ahead, Jason.
All right. Well, I'll start,
I
and then I'll kick it on down the line to Cheryl and my other two colleagues. It's that's a very current question because, right, you look nationally, and there are a lot of big LLCs buying a lot of property all over the United States. And where I think it's a complicated issue is you can have very good landlords who are local that happen to have LLC after their name, and you can have predatory, I would argue terrible landlords that are buying tens of thousands of properties around the United States that I think as you go up in scale tend not to have the best interests of the community at heart, even if they, just to give them the benefit of the doubt, if they are trying, they're just not there. So if it's a remote, someone in San Bernardino, California that's buying property in Akron, how are they going to really know the community? So I think you're right that there's probably local legislation or state. I would even argue it's probably something that Congress should get involved with, because I think it does start to become, it's an issue that's all over the United States. So I'm not really an expert on that particular area of what that legislation should look like, but I would certainly be supportive of having legislation that addressed that.
Thank you, Jason. We definitely need to create legislation that not only caps rent but prevents LLCs from coming into our communities, particularly if we need the money that bad. I think we need to create policy that allows for the neighbors to buy the property within 3 to 5 years. That allows us to have a chance to reinvest into our community before an LLC come in. But then when the LLC come in, there needs to be restrictions if we let them in. And some of those restrictions should be contributing back to the community. Some of those restrictions should be meeting the community. The Freedom Block is in the process of buying 3 properties now. The first year, we're going to create community gardens that bring the community together and ask the community what do they want to do with this property. And then we're going to do our best to do what they say we should do with that property. That allows us to have community buy-in, that allows for the communities to maintain control of the property that they grew up in and that our city can continue to love without somebody coming in and taking over. So those are some of the things that we can do. We're going to continue to talk about solutions in the afternoon. Let's give this panel a hand right now. We're going to close out this panel with one more question. If each panel member could give us 1 or 2 sentences, 30 seconds or less. What can we do? What do we need to do? What is our responsibility as a community in regard to housing equity in Akron and Summit County? And we'll start with Jason.
I would like to see a community where there's true opportunity provided for residents. Opportunity is a buzzword. There's an area called Opportunity Parkway, or Opportunity Park and Parkway in Akron, which was ground zero for urban renewal. I don't think that was an Orwellian term, in my opinion. But I think we need true opportunity where people can have decent housing and jobs. No one should have to live like the woman that we heard from earlier.
Thank you, Jason. That was 5 sentences.
Sorry.
2 sentences or 30 seconds or less.
Well, you know, I'm an elected official in another place. And you can't limit me to 2 sentences. First of all, we don't have what we need because people need to vote. You elect people to represent you. You should have access to them, and that's how you get help in making the changes. It is not all about pulling yourself up from your bootstraps. It is about making sure that systems work for everyone. Redlining only works because the federal government won't change it. And if we continue to elect people that won't change the federal government and those rules, then we limit ourselves and our futures.
Thank you, Cheryl. Ed Mika,
Can you repeat that, please?
what are some things that we must do, that we can do to ensure housing equity in Akron, Summit County?
Like she said, I think we should come together as a community. And like you said, Freedom Block, the political education trainings that we teach every day, you know, into voting. We can't change anything without voting. So we must come together and spread the word, you know, and we must understand not only to get out there and vote, but understand who you are voting for. So that's how I feel. It does start with voting.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed Mika. Brother Curtis?
Yeah, I've said it multiple times this morning, but time to reimagine affordable housing.
Yep.
And so when something's broke, you fix it. So let's be the innovators, the pioneers, given the opportunity that's before us. Let's be the change we seek, as cliche as that sounds.
Thank you, Curtis. Let's give our panel another hand. Please seek out our panel. Today they will be here most of the day. Seek them out if you have any more questions. Set up meetings with them. Understand their job and what they're trying to do in the community. Please visit the Freedom Block table. If you're not registered to vote, let's get registered to vote. This starts with us exercising and understanding our right. We will go on a break. The next panel will start at 10:45. So you have a break right now. Thank you all for being engaging. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for caring. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great morning.